All right, we are at the 9:30. So let's start if everybody can take a seat. So welcome everybody at the RPP, the RESTful Provisioning Protocol working group session at IETF 124. My name is Marco Davids. I'm your co-chair for today together with Gavin, who is remote. And sitting next to me is Andy, not in his capacity as area director, no heads at all, just a delegate to make sure. Yeah, well, maybe this beautiful hat. There are some available, by the way, but Martin will tell you about that later. But he's here as a delegate just to make sure that this session runs smoothly. Before we start, let me draw your attention to the new note well. So the message is still the same, but except it is formulated a little bit differently. It's a reminder about the processes and policies, including about conduct, privacy, and intellectual property rights that you have agreed to follow when you participated with the IETF. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to contact the chairs or even the area directors if you want to. So make sure you familiar yourself with this again. It's a reminder because you have basically already agreed when you subscribe to the meeting. Here are the usual meeting tips. If you are remote, a headset is recommended. Make sure you are muted when you are not talking. Also, make sure that you are logged into Data Tracker and enter into the queue. That helps us to also to see how many people were present, etc. And also, please state your name before speaking in the queue. These are some generic URLs for reasons of completeness. And that already brings me to the agenda. First, I would like to ask if there are any people willing to take notes. Cas? Okay, thank you, Casper. So maybe if someone can help Casper, it's a button on the data tracker, and also in this Meet Echo, and it will bring you to the notes. They are already pre-filled, so it's a really easy job. Thank you, Casper, anyway. And with that, I would like to hand over to my co-chair, Gavin. Welcome. And
thank you, Marco. Thank you. So, brief overview of our agenda for today. Marco's already gone through the administrivia, the first part at least. We will be looking at the deliverables and milestones. And once I've covered that, we'll head into the main working group business. Martin will be giving us a recap on the hackathon. Eric will be giving us an update from the Tiger team, and then we'll get into the actual deliverable work products from our working group discussions. And hopefully, if there's time, we'll have room for every other business as well. So just to remind everyone what we have committed to deliver and the timeframes we've committed to deliver on. Requirements which need to achieve working group consensus, hopefully this month. And then once the requirements have been settled, then we will proceed to put effort into core architecture and the extension mechanisms. By August next year, obviously, none of these things are set in stone, and they can all be changed if there's agreement that it doesn't make sense to try and stick to them if they're not realistic. And then 6 months after that, specifications for domain name provisioning using RPP and a mapping document that outlines how EPP and RPP kind of correspond to each other. So that would be year after next. I think we're pretty close on to achieving the first milestone. I don't know if we're going to hit it exactly, but there has been good effort there. What I would ask though is members of the working group, please have a look at the requirements document. The more eyeballs we get on it now, the fewer surprises we'll find when we get to the point where we have to ask for consensus. So please go ahead and look at it now. Don't just wait until you hear that for that call. So let's move on to the first item of business, which is Martin giving us a recap from the hackathon.
Yeah, it takes a while. Shall I try it?
Yeah, let's try again. Maybe we were both doing it at the same time, and there was a race.
I should first stop it and then try it again. There we go. And then I'll pass on the clicker to you again. All right.
Okay, great. Is this on?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Okay, great. So for those of you who don't know, the weekend before ITF, there always is a hackathon. And for the last few ITFs, there was also RPP hackathon. This time we had a nice group of people. And the goal for our RPP hackathon is to see if we can come up with interesting ideas for how to implement RPP, even though there are no specifications yet, but we can already do some investigations and look at how to model data objects or do prototyping, or even look at current work that we are working on, such as requirements or future documents. And one of the things we were looking at is, okay, how should we model DNS data in RPP? Specifically, also when taking into account the work that's going on in DNS Up with DELAG, and how does this fit, or how can we make sure that it will fit with RPP plans? So we had some good discussion there, also with the folks from DNS, the DELAG authors, to explain to us, okay, what are the plans, how are things going, what should we take into consideration to make sure that everything will work together correctly. And some more details about this will be presented later in the session by Christian. Another thing we looked at was, okay, we're working on an abstract data model, so it's not linked to any representation. So it's not JSON, it's not XML. It's just an abstract way of modeling data structures which can be used for RPP. And the question was, okay, if you want to update or modify data structures through the RPP API, so how would this work specifically for parent-child relationships that are bigger than one, so basically arrays. And we looked at the way this is being done currently in EPP, and came to the conclusion this will probably also work very good for RPP. And this is an example. This is a JSON version of a data structure which we call a labeled aggregation, which is basically a parent-child relationship where there's in this case, there is a remove command with a context element in there which has children, and each child has a label attached to it. In this case, it's the admin say label, and it's actually called label. So the server would be able to filter on the label type and do mutations. Another thing we looked at was, okay, what if you want to run multiple TLDs in an RPP deployment? So where do we put the TLD information in the URL structure? Specifically also because from the Tiger team recommendations, there was a recommendation, okay, take into account that maybe deployments will use origin intermediates or proxies that will be able to support multiple TLDs. So one option is, okay, you can put the TLD information in the path, so the option 1. This will work perfectly fine for routing the requests, but if you're running multiple TLDs and you have shared objects such as contacts, then it might become confusing. Option 2 is you can put the TLD in front of the path, and this will work fine, but only for a single TLD. It might be superfluous. So we have to probably make it optional then. Let's see. Oh, and Ruth did some excellent work in prototyping a front end for a hypothetical RPP backend. And this was basically our day and a half hacking last weekend. And these are references to all the documents and specifications that we were working on. And almost out of time. So that was very, very quickly. So if you have any additional questions about what we did, or if you would like to join next time in the hackathon, probably not sure if we're going to do a hackathon in Shenzhen, but maybe the time after that, everybody's welcome to join in and discuss and write code. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I don't see anyone in the queue. We have some time at the end of this section of the meeting for questions. So maybe we can go straight to Eric now to report back from the Tiger team.
Yes. Let's see. Do I have to request slides or?
I will try to share them with you.
Great. Perfect. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you're having a great time in Montreal. I'm going to give just a quick overview of the extensibility and extension recommendations that we have from the Tiger team. Just some background, the Tiger team consisted of Jim Gould, Jody Kolker, Pavel Kowalnik, myself, Eric, and Martin Bulinik. Our goals were to provide recommendations for RPP and also with a side quest of some enhancements to EPP, of course, based on our analysis. We have a Google Doc, which I think we're going to have talked about publishing as a PDF somewhere as well, with the complete analysis and recommendations, which I think would be great for everyone to get access to. So some quick statistics. We analyzed 67 different EPP extensions. We're sure there are more out there, but these were both what we had time to do analysis on, and also the publicly available extension that we can find good specifications on. If we look at the extensibility mix, the most extensions were object extensions and the command response extensions, with some transport mapping and protocol extensions. We couldn't find any authorization information extensions. We also identified some special extensibility types in order to look at more themes within the object extension and the command response extension categories. If we look at the RPP recommendations, we broke them into 4 different types of categories. So what we think RPP should adopt from EPP, the extensibility recommendations. Then we also had some broader stroke of recommendations around the forms that we think, or the extensibility forms that we think RPP need. The object-specific recommendations we have from EPP objects to RPP, and what EPP extensions we think we can take to RPP. So if we start with the extensibility recommendations, we think that RPP should support the object extension and the command response extension. Those were the 2 most common extensions, of course. I think not controversial choice there. I also think the command type extensions should be explicitly supported. There are some important use cases there. The function extension, we think we should also support. So instead of having to build an object extension with a single command, we think the function extension would be better to use. The operational practice, the object property extension, and the enumeration value space extension is also something we think RPP should support, even though those are not as widely used, perhaps. And if we look at things we think RPP should not support, is the authorization information extension, which we couldn't find any extensions of. And again, the key value per extension is just not something that is used a lot. And of course, the transport mapping, HTTP, is kind of baked into RPP, so there's really no need to allow extending the transport. And these are the 13 high-level accessibility recommendations. I'm not going to go through everything, but if you look at some of them, for example, the process information, we see a need for a server to return some process information to the client, for example, as it's done in the registry fee registration with the fee there. The status information to allow extensions to add additional information status. The error handling, I think adding support to extend error handling and error codes and provide clear messages is something we think RPP should have. And of course, new objects is important. So we have clear mechanisms for defining and provisioning new and custom objects beyond the core set that the RPP core set will define. And new command times is also something important to have mentioned here. So we can extend objects with new commands. And if we look at the object-specific recommendations, we have 7 object-specific recommendations. To just go through some of them. So the reset record provisioning provided generic and accessible interface for provisioning zone research records, which is something we think RPP should handle. The name server representation, we think we should allow extending the alternative ways of expressing name server information, for example, the NSSets and similar extensions. And contact types is something important to have. Many registries have different types of contacts, and I'm sure with some of the European legislation coming up, that can be even more important. And I should mention all of these are, of course, explained in more detail in the documents, if you're curious. So if you look at the extensions that we think we should adopt, we have some recommendation types where embed means we should embed this extension directly into core RPP. Extension means we should port the EPP extension to RPP. Design means that we should just verify that the RPP design supports that type of extension. And not applicable is quite self-described. So if we look at those extensions, here are the extensions we think we should embed directly into RPP. To mention a few of them, the DNS extension, I think everyone agrees it should be good to have in the core RPP. TTL, the login security extensions, organization mapping and extension. And if we look at the where we think we should just port the APP extension to RPP, some of them include the launch phase extension, the change poll extension, and based on if we get standardization in regex and for EPP, the balance extension and the whatever IDN extensions might come out of that process. And the design category, we have 35 EPP extensions that we have classified as should be supported in the RPP design. And if the extensibility recommendations are met, those EPP extensions should be able to be implemented in RPP. Of course, the target team could also perform an analysis of whether the design recommendations are met once the design is complete. And a quick next steps from us, they should incorporate the recommendations into the RPP requirements, work in the regex group on the EPP recommendations we'll present later, and also the different types of IDN extensions, etc., that should need to have a specification first. And also perform the analysis of the embed extension and design recommendations after this RPP design is complete. I think that's my time almost out, so I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Eric. No one in the queue. If anyone wants to bring anything up, now is your chance.
I'm unable to hear you, Gavin.
You can't hear me. Can anyone else hear me?
We hear you.
Okay, Eric, I think it may be on your end.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, no problem. So there's no one in the queue. Oh no, so Pavel, please come and ask your question.
Paul Kowalik. It's less than a question, rather just a remark. Let's say the recommendations were already to the great extent included in the recommendation in the requirements draft, the latest version. Not all of them. I realized afterwards that one section was not included, but this was already after closing the data tracker, so we'll do that after the meeting.
Thank you. And Jim Gould?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a statement that this work was very enlightening. I believe that this kind of work should be done periodically for any protocol based on the fact that we were able to find 67 extensions and see opportunities for consolidation and standardization in EPP itself. Makes this a very useful exercise for the future that I would recommend.
And Scott.
Scott Hollenbeck. These are reasonable recommendations. So I think we really ought to do something to get them accepted as work items if possible.
Thank you. Anything else to contribute before we move on to the next item on the agenda? Hearing none, let's move on then. So back to you, Martin, to talk about requirements.
Okay. Thank you, Gavin. As Gavin already mentioned, the requirements document is a milestone for this working group. Just before this meeting, we published the latest version, the 01. It addressed a lot of open issues and questions that popped up after the last meeting and questions that we had asked at the last meeting. And yeah, Gavin already mentioned that we do need feedback on this document. We feel it's ready for review, and we would really appreciate anybody taking some time looking at it, and so we can ask the chairs to do a call for consensus, and so we'll be able to continue with the work after this document. So a lot of people were also present at the last session at IETF 123, and there we asked a bunch of questions about open issues that we still had in the document. And together with those responses and the responses we got, for example, at Center and other discussions maybe on the list, we resolved a number of issues. For example, the strict versus lenient data validation. So we decided to go with strict validation. That the consensus was that for a registry system, this was the better choice. So until we find evidence to the contrary, we're going to stick with strict validation. Response caching was deemed to be useful, so we're going to include that in the requirements. Historical data, there was not much support for that, so it's not going to be as a must requirement. It can become an optional extension later on, of course. Bodiless requests and responses were assumed to be very useful, so this is a requirement now. Updating a password in the protocol was not much support for that, so it's not going to be a requirement, but it can become an extension later. Transaction information in the headers, same thing, or we think that's going to be useful, so we include it in the requirements. And then we have a difficult one, the client data omission. It's still open. So the current thinking is that maybe here we should go with making fields optional and then providing a profile that will make clear what fields are required in what situation. But this is linked to the last item on this list, must support profiles, which is also open. So these are connected. So we really need specifically for these two, we need some input where to go. And another easy one to close was the 1.2, which was a pretty vague text about we really like a nice API. So remove that one. So other updates in the latest version was we added support for thick and thin registry models, added specific sections for requirements for host, domain, and contact object types. Also included specifically the future ways of handling delegation information with DELEG. And also took a look at the original requirements for RRP in RFC 3357 and copied from there what was still relevant and useful into our requirements. And also had a long think about functional equivalent for the EPP poll command, where we figured, okay, EPP poll is very useful, but it can become much more useful. So there are other things we can do there. And so we added some additional text there about potential ways of enhancing poll-like features. And we added extensibility requirements related to the tag team recommendations already. And other stuff, yeah, we worked on the security requirements, consideration sections, added more security requirements, and added a list of essential and optional extensions. So these are extensions that are added in an appendix, so they're not really a part of the core requirements. The next step, a major thing will be incorporating the target team recommendations, as Pavel mentioned. We're already a long way, or there's already been done a lot of work in this area, so we still have to make sure, have to go over everything again, see that we didn't miss anything, and add the last items that were not added to the document requirements document yet, add those as well. We want to close out all the existing open GitHub issues, of course, and then see if we can get consensus on the requirements document. Yeah, this month is going to be very tight. It's probably not going to make that, but it would be really, really nice if we could have consensus on this before the next meeting. And at that point, the document will be placed in a parked status. Doesn't mean it cannot be updated, of course. But it will then be possible to start work on the core document, the data model, and stuff like that. And when we find that we do need to go back to the requirements, then we can always update the requirements, and if there is consensus. So it's not set in stone, but we do need a good set of requirements as a starting point, so we know what we're going to be developing or designing. And yeah, after all of this, when the RPP protocol has been completed, then probably this requirements document will be published as an informational RFC. Yeah. So if there are any questions about this.
Jim?
Yeah, Jim Gould from VeriSign. First off, excellent work. I mean, there's so many requirements in there. I started going through it this morning. And I thought I'd get through all of it. I couldn't. I got through like a quarter of it, but I commit that I'm going to go through it and provide feedback. Some initial thoughts was that we need to be careful with the normative language in some of those requirements because you want to leave flexibility in the design itself.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
I'm sorry. Be careful with the normative language, like the must
Okay.
in there. And also we need to consider like the scope of this protocol. I mean, I saw one particular requirement that concerned me related to search. This is a provisioning protocol. So as we start putting must language related to searching, that's a different thing. I mean, EPP servers don't really provide that kind of search capability. I understand it. But then you really want to think about OLTP kind of functions in this. It may be a different protocol that would do that kind of search capability. Don't know. But I'll provide my feedback on the list. Overall, impressive amount of work. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for taking the time in looking into the requirements. And any feedback is of course good feedback. So, and regarding search, yeah, it's not an EPP, but we're not reinventing EPP. So we can add stuff that's not in our EPP, but there needs to be consensus. Of course, is search something that we want? So if there is consensus that search isn't useful for RPP, then well, we shouldn't build it then. Or it could be an extension maybe for later work. So, yeah.
Yeah, hi, Christopher. On the two open points, I do think that profiles are kind of a solution to something we really want to have in the requirements, and that is to signal capabilities, to signal what a client should do. So maybe we should rephrase it to something more close to the goal instead of solutions.
Yeah, I agree. It's something we need. So if you have a proposal, then please submit a PR. Thank you. Nobody else in the queue?
No.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So I just realised I was talking on mute. Yeah, thank you, Martin. So let's move on to Pavel to talk about the architecture doc.
Yes. So, thank you. Does it work? Yes. So there's a short update again about the architecture document, which has been adopted by the working group. Thank you for that. So a short recap. So the document describes the overall, let's say, architectural layers of the protocol, and let's say lays down the principles how we want to design it. So in the version, wait a second. I think this is not the right version. Okay, because one slide is missing. All right, I can do it without slide. So basically, what is also, let's say, become apparent from this let's say document and the rework that we've done is the mapping on the documents that the working group could be working on. So we have already two documents, which one was presented before by Martin, which is the core document, which will be dealing with this layer of HTTP transport and then all the URL mappings and all this stuff. And today I'll be presenting the data elements draft, which will be more covering this part. So basically we'll be filling in this architecture with documents to build the protocol. What updates we've done for the 03 version. So this one will be replaced by the working group named document because the adoption was after the data trackers closed. So I didn't want to mess up with the naming before meeting. So I will do it after we split the HTTP layer into two subsections. One is describing basically what we reuse from HTTP as is. So basically, which doesn't require any profiling. It just requires saying, yeah, we want to use this feature. And the other items, which basically the building blocks are there, but we just have to define how we want to use them. So they need some more in-depth specification from RPP. We also put down some basic principles how we want to treat RPP codes and by relation to HTTP codes. So this is not a detailed description. This will be in the design documents, but this defines the principles we want to follow. We added some sections which kind of were missing from the requirements, like promotion of the standard extensions and also the client ID password part was missing, so this we covered in 03. There are some open items still in GitHub. Most of them are either May requirements, so we didn't put priority into them right now, and some of them are not really directly related to architecture, or they are blocked by not closed requirements discussion on some items. So basically, we will put effort into this after the requirements discussion is closed, I guess. Oh no, this slide was not missing. Is there, but it was on the end. So my bad. So this is what I was mentioning. So this architecture picture is right now already being worked on. Let's say to fill in with the design documents. These are very early drafts, both of them, but just to for the working group to know that. Next steps. So I guess after we reach the milestone with the requirements, we'll review it again and see what's missing. So I think this is the most natural step to do. We would like to have more reviews from the working group, especially after the work was adopted. I think we had good feedback so far, but it was rather partial or very generic feedback. But full reviews are always useful to without anything which is maybe missing or unclear. Yeah, so there is more question whether anyone has opinion if any external reviews are already helpful at this stage or maybe at a later stage. Personally, I don't have any experience with that, so any advice would be helpful. And I think there's something that I would like the working group to discuss a bit, what eventually to do with the document, because I publish it as an informational track, and the only issue is, I guess, our charter, which has the word architecture with proposed standard in the same sentence. So my personal opinion is that this document doesn't describe a protocol, so it's not really good or a standard track. So I would treat it as a working group document, and maybe we decided to publish later, but I don't know if this charter issue is an issue, and maybe some opinions or guidance on this would be helpful. This was it. Anyone in the queue? No.
No one in the queue.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel. So now we can switch back to Martin to talk about the core document.
I need to make up some time or what?
No, we're good.
Okay. Pavel's bigger than me. So the requirements, of course, are not finished, but that didn't stop us from already looking into potential solutions. So these are described in what we call the core document. These are it's also a very much work in progress, but these are capturing ideas for potential future ways of implementing RPP requirements. So in this version, latest version, we had some interesting changes. So before we had two different response codes. We had basically the EPP code and an RPP code. This was merged into a single RPP code header. We did some mapping between HTTP status codes and RPP code. We added actually we updated the authorization header for object authorization, separated the process information from the payload in certain processes, added an availability path for checking if object availability, looked at problem details, how can you return error information in a standardized way, and there's a lot of cleanup and updating of examples. I'll go into more detail in for some of those. So for the RPP code header, we want to remain backwards compatible with EPP here. So the easiest way for us, we thought, was by just adding a new leading digit. And then for EPP codes, the leading digit will be 0, and for RPP will be 1. So there's a nice and clean separation, and we can just reuse the EPP codes from if you're running RPP in front of EPP, then you can return the EPP codes in the RPP code header. This one is interesting, like the authorization header. This is not the authorization for interacting with the RPP API itself. This one is for object authorization. For instance, like in EPP, you have the auth info. If you do it, and for RPP, we are thinking, okay, how can we do this? Because you can only have, in theory, I think you can have multiple authorization headers, but there will probably be very few frameworks or servers that will support having multiple HTTP authorization headers. So we came up with a similar header that is based on the HTTP authorization header, which contains a authorization scheme, which is extensible. You can have multiple schemes there in theory, and some authorization parameters. And these are basically the same ones that are also in the auth info token in EPP. So there's the actual value and an optional row ID. And for the non-CRUD processes, for example, the renewal or transfer, we came up with a generic interface that separates the process data from the actual object data. For example, if you want to renew an object or you want to renew a domain name, then the object data will be the domain name information itself, but the process information can be stuff like how long do I want to rename it, renew the domain name. For example, you can have a parameter 2 years, and that would be like the process information, and it's separated from the object information itself. And in the response, there would be a location URI, which is a reference to a newly created URL, which is the location where you can find the status information of the process. So it can be a long-running process or it can be short-running process, but there is very easy to get the latest status information of this process then. Here we had a lot of discussion about how are we going to check if objects are available for registration. This is similar to EPP check, and what we came up with for now is that we have a /availability path segment, which will work for both the head and the get method. And if you use head, you will get a very quick response, like basically what you get now in EPP check. If you could like will be false or true, 0, 1, if it's available. And you can do get for a more detailed response. So you can return more information there. For example, you can do pricing information, or if there are additional rules involved for registering objects. For instance, if you have a geo GTLD with restrictions to who can register the domain name, you have to maybe live in a certain area, then you can return these rules in the detailed response. Problem details. This is a standard way for returning error responses in HTTP APIs. And for this will probably work very well for RPP. We can register a new problem type. We can have an IANA identifier, which can be used by machines to identify the problem error type. And then you can also have additional human readable error information. So, and that can contain like stuff like result codes, um, information on where in the, for example, the payload was an error, um, reasons why a request failed, and you can have multiple errors in a single problem detail. So let's see. Next steps. Well, as I mentioned, one of the first things we need to do is see if we can align everything that's in the core document with what's in the requirement, and also what's in the target team recommendations, which should be the same. And when that's done and the document is more stable, and then we're probably going to ask for adoption in this working group. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. If there are any questions.
Jim?
Yeah, Jim Gould from VeriSign. Based on what you presented, I first off, I like the idea of like taking the existing EPP result codes and adding a prefix. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to let's reinvent a new set of codes. But one question I had is whether or not you considered creating like an IANA registry associated with these codes so they can be extended based on the analysis we did on the EPP extensions.
Sorry, there was a sneeze in between. So
I'm sorry. The,
IANA registry for.
Did you consider creating like an IANA registry of the codes that would be pre-populated with the initial set that could be extended later?
It's not. We didn't really consider that yet. I think, but it's an option. We can do that. Yeah. So we need more look better into if that's useful. I don't think for EPP they're not in the IANA registry, right? I don't know what the
No, they're
rationale
not,
was
and
there.
they're enumeration in the XML
Exactly.
schema. Yeah.
So,
but then that way would wind up happening is that any new codes that would be specific to RPP could be in a
yeah, because the problem with in EPP, the enumeration is very hard to extend, of course. So I see your point that if it's in IANA registry, it might be easier to add more codes.
Yeah, and that way we could address one of the recommendations
to
make that extensible. The other is, and maybe I'm just need to be enlightened here, is the use of the HTTP headers for the application data. My preference would be to have that in the packet itself. So I just would be careful with how many places that you're leveraging the HTTP headers, but it'd be also good to see what are best practices in the industry related to doing what you're proposing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an area where we take a lot of where we're very careful. We try to look at what's being done in other areas that work on HTTP APIs. So we look at the HTTP API working group and see what's common in industry, so that we're not trying to invent the wheel. We're trying to reuse as much as possible and also stay as close as possible to the way developers think about how to work with APIs. So it has to be easy and fit an existing workflow and tooling and architecture. So it's very easy to adopt.
It would be good to have some of those references if you know them, and that way it would directly address.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Can you come back to the slide with error detail?
Which one?
Yes, this one.
Oh, this one, probably.
Yeah, and so this less question to you directly, but maybe question to some EPP experts in the room, because what we modeled here is this errors as an array of errors. This is not a standard of 9457. Actually, 9457 is, let's say, deliberately designed for single error message. And so this error array is an extension which is combined with the specification, but it's not a standard itself. And we found it, it was surprising to us that EPP has multiple errors possibility, but we were not sure how common it is to use it. Is it only something in the schema, but which doesn't come in the wild, or should we design around it, because this a hell to process for the clients as well, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure either if it's being actually used a lot.
Jim Gould from VeriSign. Actually, I completely forgot about that. I'm going to take a look at it again, but yeah, no, we certainly only return one result code. And I was thinking that you were proposing to return multiples. Like, do you really want to do that? So I'll take a closer look, but it would be interesting to hear from other registries out there. And Jody as well. Would you like to see multiple codes, Jody?
Well, if you look at DNS with extended error codes, sometimes I see multiple codes being returned from Google or something. It happens.
This is Jody Kolker. You know, seeing multiple error codes, I think, would be fine as long as we're able to parse through them. In fact, for some situations, it might be nice to have, knowing that there's more than one problem, instead of cleaning up one problem, having to set it again, and then find out there's a different problem with it. I might change my mind in 10 minutes.
I'm going to jump back in here. Yeah, actually, I thought you had said that what's most important is see success and error. And in the case of the error, it's not like you have logic that would be driven based on the specific error code, which you may look for in your logs to troubleshoot. But in general, it's kind of, yeah, come on back.
This is Jody again. Yeah, we would definitely look at our log files to see what's wrong. Now whether, you know, if we're talking about just an avail check, yeah, all we want back is a success or a failure. We'll figure it out from there. But if it's something on the registration or that's completely wrong, I mean, that would be nice to have multiples, I guess. I mean, it could be, but definitely on the check, we're just looking for success or failure because we're trying to get the customer through as fast as possible.
Yeah, I'm personally, I'm not sure if having multiple errors is very useful, because if you have, for example, 2 errors and the second one is dependent on the first one, you fix the first one, the second one might change to a different error. So
Unless instead of just having them a list, maybe you have a primary and some additional detailed ones. I don't know, because in general, when you're coding it, you would want to see whether or not success or failure and a general category of the failure. And then if you want like a compiler kind of detail, you can get the others. I don't know. Just thought.
yeah, so it probably will be a good thing if we ask around and see, okay, how much is this being used in the real world, and should we use this as a backwards compatibility thing for EPP, or can we potentially go with a single error and maybe put everything else as a warning? I don't know. So
I'm just going to, I added myself to the queue because I wanted to suggest maybe there's something the Tiger team could feedback on, something for you to think about maybe. But not seeing anyone else, and I think we're nearly at the end of the available time. In fact, Marco's closed the queue. So thank you very much, Martin. We did use some of the open mic time to discuss this topic. So we'll now move on to Christian's presentation on DNS data. Thank you, Christian.
Yes, 1 second.
So Guten
Tag.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It seems to be a bit quiet, so yeah, I'm a bit confused. So I'm doing just a short recap on what the core idea is behind this draft. So basically, we have DNS with their RFCs, and we put that into a JSON structure to submit it through RPP. The structure is usable within the host attribute model by just placing it in the domain object. And we can use it in the host object model by putting that infrastructure, that structure into the host object and having a reference in the domain object. There is something missing in this example. I get later to it. We, of course, can use it for DNSSEC because DNSSEC is kind of DNS. So we just put DS records in it and have that operational controls from EPP, like the maximum signature lifetime in a control section where we might control that from the client. Regarding the changes from 00201, they are mostly editorial. There is a bit of a it makes explicit that we are using the presentation format and not going to the wire format, which might be confusing for some RFCs in DNS. So actually, we're going to the presentation format, and that allows us to set all data types to string. Okay, now back to the challenges. So host objects are quite a thing. Host objects represent the clue records for a domain. And the NS records for a domain are expressed by having a relation between a domain object and a host object. They are kind of implicit with this. So having a look at DELEC, DELEC, first of all, it has no concept of clues. The IPs are within the DELEC record and belonging to the domain object. You can have DELEC I, which is kind of a CNAME or a reference to another DELEC record, which then has the correct point of delegation or the correct delegation info. The DELEC working group also considers to later on having DS records or something related to the delegation within their records. So that also might be interesting to consider for us and how we design the DNS part. So all in all, it sums up to who is in control of the delegation records. I would do some examples, getting into it, having a short talk on it, having some pros and cons, and after that, I would like to hear some opinions from the room on where to go and what considerations from your side are within that. So first example, we have the domain object in full control of the delegation, and we have the host object just for clues. So the core part is that the add in the name, which is like here, is referring to the same object they are reside in. That allows for the domain owner to have full control. We have a clear separation, so the glue records are in the host object, and DELEC would reside on the domain level. But having DELEC on the domain level, IPs, which are normally in the glue, are also on the domain object and split it up between the domain object and the host object. Second, we reverse the direction, so we give full control to the host object, which is fine for name server operators. So they can control how the records in the domain part would reside to resemble their name servers. So the culprit is that we have here an add or a reference to something which resides on the domain object, which is kind of not intentional. What we have considered is to have these records in a separate structure to allow for them to have a clear they are referring to something outside of the current object. So assumption, the name server operator and the domain owner have some sort of trust to do this. Culprits, yeah, DELEC might be switched on or off by intention from the name server operator without knowledge of the domain owner, which then might move traffic to these name servers or take away the traffic from this name server because the name server operator might be just one of several. So we get to a shared control of the delegation. So in this example, the reference to the object, to the host object, or you can use whatever object you like. You can transfer that this is example to at the to maybe key objects or whatever you like. The reference within the domain object also allows for some records of the domain part resides in the host object. So that would be this example. We have a clear separation of the controls. So the domain owner intentionally gives away allows explicitly for the definition of those records in the referenced object. Last but not least, templating. Domain Connect allows for templating, so they having this kind of domain notation, which makes explicit that there are a different context set here. So that would make it explicit, but of course this comes as a culprit of that we add complexity within those records. We have to parse them explicitly for those things. And of course, we shouldn't do this in one draft only. This should be live in the core objects and described by the core architecture, which identifiers could be used or not could be used. So I would give it to the audience and yeah.
Scott Hollenbeck. I think the answer to your question lies in the question you asked. Who controls the delegation, right? And I think the group should also consider that you are not bound by current EPP semantics here, right? So it's a worthy exercise to see, can we make this work using the EPP concepts of either host objects or host attributes? But deleg is different, right? So you might find, in fact, I think you've already found that there are going to be challenges with trying to make it work using the legacy semantics. So don't use them. Okay, if it turns out that the entity that controls the delegation is not, like the entity that controls the domain name, which is the way it works with EPP, but it's perhaps a name server operator, maybe the right answer here is a new type of object, something called a delegation object that gets created and is maintained and managed by name server operators, who could be the hosting providers of the world, and there might be entities that don't currently have a role in our provisioning ecosystem today. Don't let that stop you. Okay.
Thank you.
Paul Kowalik. To the notion of templating. So I think no matter which notation you use, if it's with such notation or another, so the at character is also a template character. So basically it's an alias for something else. And I think if you have an object like this having two different contexts in one object, it's probably less confusing if they are different. So.
Yes, of course. And I didn't mention, I think, you can also use that domain notation within the record itself.
Yeah, Jim Gold from VeriSign. We actually had a really good meeting yesterday with Peter on Delag, and we brainstormed for like an hour and a half on it. But what was interesting is the fact that we came up with the idea of a Delag object. In this case, it would be an object with either a client or server generated identifier, not a name, identifier, that would then link to the domain names like name servers in parallel with name servers. And what you said where host object is only for the glue. Host objects are used as well for external hosts, where the advantage is the fact that there could be thousands of domain names linked to a particular host, and that host, the sponsoring person for the host can make a global change with one command instead of having to update 1,000 domain names. So there are advantages to having it defined as an object that's then linked.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian. And we'll move on to the last presentation for the meeting, which is Pavel again.
All right, so there's a completely new draft that I wanted to present to the working group, which is RPP data objects. So as I mentioned in the presentation before, this is, let's say, very much anchored to the architecture document. So the draft is intended to cover these two boxes. So the describing the data elements and describing the operations of this data elements without moving into mapping to a certain representation. So it's the draft is not talking about JSON or any other representation. It's just talking about what data elements are there, identifying them, and defining the relations between them and operations which can be done. So basically, one element which is also part of this story is the IANA registry. So basically, the data elements and the objects and everything can be then also registered by IANA and browsed through. So basically, everyone from external will see what kind of data in RPP ecosystem is supported and whether one can reuse it or should define some new custom extension to support own use case. So for data elements, there's a simple semantics defined, which covers a name of the element, the identifier, data type, cardinality, mutability description, and some constraints and operations which are allowed on the data element. So on the operations, the approach we took is basically to describe the uniform interface. So basically, basic CRUD interface, which should apply the same way to all objects. Of course, an object definition can tell that some, let's say, for example, update or delete is not supported at all, or it's only read only. But if one of these operations is supported, it should be defined the same way. And on top of it, of course, the object may support additional operations which are beyond this simple schema. To build this kind of description, we had to define, let's say, some primitives. The 01 draft, which was published, has just a not normative notion of string and integers. And 02, which is in the works, basically we had some normative definition of some other data types which we think will be useful for this protocol. And there is also the section which tells about common data types, which is basically a specialization of these basic primitives for certain use cases. So for example, identifier is a string, but with certain constraints. In the 01, there was a timestamp in this section, but right now we moved it to the primitives. The client identifier is still defined in O1, but we have a question mark whether we will move it basically as a relation to a client object, and the phone number is also specified in there. Then, because we are modeling data, we had to also define some vocabulary around the relations. So basically, this is not a new field we have to discover. We just reused things that are existing. So we have simple aggregations, compositions. We have dictionaries with the same, let's say, aggregation and composition variant. What is kind of special, what we figure out when working through the EPP data model is that we have also the variants which are labeled. What it means that basically a relation to an object has a label. A typical example would be relation between domain and the contact, where the same contact can be defined, let's say, with two labels like administrative contact or a technical contact. So basically, the labels are on the edge of the relation, as you may see. We also defined the component objects, which, you know, in programming language, you may say these are structs. So they hold data, but they don't have any operations on them. So in EPP, there are quite many of them, like period, like status objects, even let's say DNS resource object. And name server object is not host object, so not confusing these two. These are more related to what Christian was showing. Or authorization information, postal address, and so on and so forth. So basically, there are basic data structure which can be embedded in different places. And finally, we have the data objects. So basically, the core of the draft, which right now we think should cover these four, let's say, data object types based on what the requirements are saying. So the first three are quite obvious. So domain name object, however, incorporating already the Tiger team requirements, there is not only 5731, which we take as a baseline, but also the other RFCs, which are describing DNSSEC, I think TTL and RGP. The contact data objects, the same. There's 5733 as base plus extensions which Tiger team already recommended, and so on for host data object and organizational data objects. This is also a result of the Tiger team investigation or recommendation that RPP should cover this as well. So of course, if requirements would shift and something will be adjusted, this will have to follow also on this list. So most of it, especially on the beyond the basic EPP RFCs, are not yet there in the draft. So draft is still work in progress, but I will come to that as well. And finally, there is the IANA data object registry specified, which describes basically the data objects and the component objects with some subset of these properties that I presented before. So we don't want to overload IANA with all the information, especially like descriptions and constraints are rather human readable than something that machine can process. So I think this is not useful in IANA registry directly, but let's say having a repository of these data elements with the basic details is useful. So this just to show how much work is still ahead of us in this draft, but I really wanted to present it already to get early feedback whether, let's say, this going into right direction, or whether there's any hints from the working group which aspects we should still look at. So I think domain object is specified the most out of this draft. For host and contacts, just the basic data structures, and for organizations we haven't even started. Yeah, so basically the first approach we took is to kind of document how the data structures of EPP are modeled, and then to think, okay, should we change something or should we remodel something? So basically start at this and start refactoring later. Yes, so there's a link to the draft. I will publish it also to the mailing list after the meeting. I think we will update it to O2 already, so that you have the most fresh version, and you can also jump to the GitHub and come to any issues. And I think this is, if let's say working group finds it useful, even before adoption, I think we'll welcome if anyone could participate in co-authoring this draft, because there's a substantial amount of work. So for sure we will welcome and help already upfront before we ask for adoption. Yes, we have some queue, I see.
Yeah, we have Werner in the queue.
Yeah, Werner.
But the work we're doing now is, is in the style of our habit of being very diligent in doing the whole job. We're the only registry in the world, and we have to have the information that is there. But actually, reality has changed. Nowadays we're no longer the only registry in the world. The stuff that we're registering is registered elsewhere, and these other registries have systems, they have data structures, and they have references, and they have numbers to identify the objects in there. Probably in the context of domain names, the most important registries that we should think of are the business registers and the related systems that LEIs or the DUNS records or the location identifiers that are actually quite well known, and those are separate registers. Now, probably the minimum that we should put into our data model is a way to refer to those and say, actually, then once we refer to those, we'll say, what is the status of the data that we actually have here? Is that an exact match of what we had? Was it verified as of that timestamp to be equivalent? But it's no longer that we're the only ones holding the data about the data subject necessarily. Of course, it's different for natural persons and for businesses, and it's different if you have single identifiers where a given entity can only have one, whereas things like DIDs or whatever, but the same entity can have multiple identifiers.
There's a very valid point. So basically, I also mentioned it shortly when talking about client identifier. So basically, right now, it's also a relation to an object which is not for every registry visible for provisioning. So basically, client is a reflection of a registrar, and it's an object somewhere in the database, but it's not exposed over the provisioning API. So something that we thought of in the consideration is basically to defining possibility to relate the object which is not exposed by the RPP server itself. So it can be an object within its realm, or it can be an object in other realm. And I think it can be covered by same kind of modeling.
Yeah, Jim Gold from VeriSign. One thing that I would like to see, and it doesn't need to match the way EPP did it. I like the way EPP had separate drafts for each of the data objects. But if you're going to embed it into one draft, it'd be great if they all followed a particular specific template. So that way, if new objects need to get created, you already have a template to work from. Because the one thing that I experienced with like data escrow is I had to figure out in adding a new object for data escrow, like what does that look like? But it would be good based on the fact that we want to extend by object to use a common structure or template.
Yeah. So this how actually this draft is structured already. So every data object is specified using very strict template, let's say, notation. And to make it even more formal, the INR registry is very structured in the end. So basically, you have two levels of very structured description of the objects.
Good, thank you. And on the IANA registry, I'm still thinking of whether or not use of an IANA registry is kind of the definition to sort of match what's done in XML schema for EPP. It may be better to consider like a mix of, you know, a JSON schema or some other schema language to go along with a IANA registry, as opposed to, my concern would be complex objects. The simple elements are pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah. So at least I don't know of any formal language that we can use for just data modeling. But I think where
Well,
we
I thought you
talk
were
about
going to use that to allow for, in this case, there would be the servers or the clients to be able to suck in the definitions to do the validation.
Just let me finish. So when we will be talking about mapping, this will be the document which is not yet on the map here, which will tell how to represent data objects, let's say primitive structure description in JSON in this case.
Okay.
And I think out of this two information, you could render a JSON schema. So this is the question that working group will have to answer, whether we want to have a normative JSON schema, or do we have some procedural difficulties to have as, let's say, some reference to use, but it can be CDDL or whatever we decide to use for JSON. But I think this will come as from this parts together.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Thanks.
So I put myself in the queue because I wanted to say something substantially similar to what Jim just said, but I wanted to maybe get a bit further and say there may be other advantages to splitting this document into multiple documents, which is it will also help when in terms of division of labor. So rather than having one very large document that everyone's trying to work in, having separate documents and then having, that makes it easier to kind of collaborate. And also when it gets to the point where we may want to bring in experts from other fields or from other areas to look, they're not going to be trying to boil the ocean and review an enormous draft. They can just focus on one small document that's focused just on the area that they may be more familiar with. So those are just my two follow-up comments from what Jim just said. But don't take, this isn't with me without my hat on, as you can see. I'm not in the room, so I haven't got one of those fancy hats. So they're just an individual submission.
So yeah, this is something that we, of course, also thought of whether we should start it in separate documents. So right now, from editorial standpoint, it was just easier to work in one piece, especially that part of the document is describing like the vocabulary, and when, let's say, 3 sections describe the objects themselves. So if we will going to split it, likely we'll end up with 4 or 5 documents out of this one. I remember my first presentation on architecture with the simple calculation that following this path we'll end up with 18 documents describing RPP. So nobody was amused about it. So let's say I think there's constant pros and cons on both sides. So I believe we don't have to decide it right now, but let's say we will continue working in one document, and splitting it in parts is I think pretty easy at some point, at least with the current structure we have in the document.
Okay, Jim, is that an old hand or a new one? Old one. Okay. Anyone else with anything they would like to add? I locked the queue, then I realized we actually have the time, so I reopened it. Because the last 10 minutes of the meeting are for any other business. So any other business? Werner.
Yes, this was a topic that was briefly touched upon in Madrid, which is the status of the information that we have and whether we have proof that this is true. I mean, it's such a very simple thing, you know, but it is not used to be something that we consider to be our job to even express, such as the registrant of this domain name is such and such. No, that's what's on the record, so that's what we said, you know. But is it true? Well, and if it is true, how do we know? To what strength, has the verification taken place? I believe that we would do well to add that into the data model so that we have the ability to express it. It doesn't have to be something that is always going to be used, but we need to make a path available for those who need to demonstrate that a certain fact is true and verified, and possibly turn that into a new product, which probably is going to be viewed as helpful, for the people who are trying to make a living. Can actually add value by using this avenue in the data model.
Paul Kowalik. So to that point, maybe that is something I didn't say explicitly. So basically, the draft of the data objects foresees already the extensibility. So basically, if the contact object is described, it will be relatively easy to extend it with additional information like additional data fields or verification information or whatever. This will be at let's say smaller granularity than currently in EPP. So basically, all you would do is write specification of the data field and register it at IANA. So basically, this will be extending the data objects, and of course, this has to work with the whole protocol with signaling, so that the clients know which data to expect and how to process it. So this is a different area, but on the data modeling itself, this already in the draft. Right now, we focus to move on with the functionality that EPP already has in the data model, but the extensibility is in the core. So basically, it should be easy to add whatever the need would be. Yeah.
Okay, and with that, I think we're done for this time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the presenters who are also the authors, not only for presenting, but for the very hard work. Keep up that good work. Thank you, note taker. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Andy. There's an important message in the chat. There are RPP hats. They're going to be valuable in the future, like collector's items. So pick one up if you haven't got one. There's more in stock, but there's only 10 or so here. So be fast. It's a first come, first serve. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye, Kevin. Thanks. Yeah, that's helpful, right? Yep.